Hi everybody, Adrian here on another Thursday evening webinar. So the topic tonight is the fourfold human being. Now, just to give a little bit of context to that of where this has come from, I'd like to share a little bit about the history and my biography around my personal development and my spiritual development. So for many years as a teenager, I was quite excited about the realm of nature and spirituality. And then in my 20s, I was really searching for that sort of next level of understanding for myself. And luckily enough, in 1992, so that's 30 years ago now, I came across a philosopher and teacher, spiritual teacher called Rudolf Steiner. And that was because my eldest son, we were looking for a kindergarten for him in Tasmania at the time where we were living. And a good friend of mine was a teacher in an alternative school, and I wasn't quite sure what this alternative school was. And he said, come along and have a look. It's a Steiner school. And I went along to the kindergarten, had a look, really fell in love with the model of the school and what was being offered there. And over time, I really got involved with the spiritual side of Steiner's teaching. And then, of course, my psychotherapy and counseling is very much based around Rudolf Steiner's work. And the name that Rudolf Steiner gives his work is Anthroposophy. And it just really means the study of the human being or study of mankind or person kind. So that's a little bit of a context, a bit of a background to where my knowledge, my wisdom, my insights, my understandings, my challenges, my research, my study comes from, is from that space of Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy. And one of the key factors in working with anthroposophy is understanding the basics. What is the humankind? What is man? What is woman? What is it to be human? So what I want to share with you tonight is some of the very basic understandings that arose from Rudolf Steiner. And of course, Rudolf Steiner got his knowledge from his teachers, his masters, and that ancient wisdom that keeps coming through, millennia after millennia after millennia. There is an understanding of the spiritual aspect of being human. So let's put this into a little bit of a shelf or into a bit of a container for you, so that when you listen, you can take it on board and then digest it, and then get your own connection to what I'm sharing with you. So the fourfold human being. The physical is the first part. We all know about the physical being of ourselves, and we'll talk a little bit about more of that in a moment. And then we've what we call the etheric realm. Some people call it the life body. And oftentimes people talk about seeing the aura, seeing the energy field around people in that etheric space, into the ethers. And then the third part of that makeup of the anthroposophically based fourfold human being is what we call the astral realm, the astrality, the starry realm, the animal realm. It's where all the emotions and feelings live, the soul aspect of being human. And then we have the fourth aspect, which is unique to human beings. And this is what we call the I presence. And I will share a little bit more as we go along, but I want to take us all the way back to the beginning of the first aspect of that fourfold human being, which is the physical. So if you liken the physical, it can be like the mineral realm. So imagine for a moment that you have a crystal or you have a rock, which is very much mineralized, very much about the carbon aspect. And it may have some silica quality into it and other chemical makeup in that physical realm. So when we look at the physical body, there's usually there are lots of components around it, but there are two basic components to it. And that's the carbon aspect of us, which is a bit like, if you like, the moon forces, the feminine moon forces, the pliable, the movable form. And then we have what we call the silica process. And there's a lot of silica, our hair, our fingernails, parts of the skin, and they're made up by what we call the silica process. So we've got the carbon and the silica that are always in balance, that masculine, feminine. So the silica quality is more masculine. It's what the hardening process is. And it forms that hardness. It has the quality of forming. So when we have the moon forces and we have the Saturn forces of the masculine and feminine, of the carbon and the silica, then we get that beautiful balance. And it's really important to keep that balance so that we don't become too firm and too solid in the masculine, and not too, if you like, the watery realm or the less form side of the feminine, the carbon. So we have to work within both those spheres. And it's really important to have a balanced diet and a balanced environment to bring that into play. Really, really important. So the physical body, how do we know we're physical? Well, all you got to do is touch, feel, and we know there's some form there. You know, the 3D realm is really the physical realm. It's what we can touch, it's what we can experience. And if we hit our finger with a hammer, we know we're in the physical body because it hurts, we have pain. So very much around the physical body is looking after that physical body. So from a holistic spiritual perspective, it's all about looking after ourselves, taking responsibility to look after all our realms and understanding all the realms of what it is to be a fourfold human being. So we have to eat well, move well, sleep well, have the right nutrition, look after the body really well, and getting the body work, doing those things to keep us mobile, to keep us active, running, walking, gymming, swimming, whatever it takes to stay physically fit. So the physical body is in good shape, externally and internally. So what you put in your mouth, are you putting good, clean, energetic, I said organic food into your system, or are you putting rubbish into the system? Because when you drive a motor car, you put really good quality fuel into it, because if you put rubbish fuel into it, it's going to break down, and we're no different. And yet, sadly, it's still not deeply embedded in people's consciousness to eat well, to have really good, clean food without toxins, without poisons, without the pesticides, without the herbicides, because they poison the physical body. And as I go on into the etheric body, which I'm going to do in a moment, I'll talk about the importance of looking after the physical body so that we can have a healthy etheric body or life force body. So that's the physical realm. That's the physical realm. So the question for you is, where are you right now with your physical body, with your physical realm? Are you taking full responsibility? Are you taking full responsibility? Because that's what we can do. We can take responsibility. So let's move aside and let's get to the second feature, which is the etheric body. Now, I'd like to liken this to something so that there's more understanding. And if you think of the plant realm, if you think of a beautiful daffodil or a rose or a beautiful shrub, that very much lives in those two realms. It's physical, it's made up of carbon and silica and other physical aspects. And it's physical, you can touch it, feel it, snap it, break it. But if you have a rock, it's not connected to anything. It's not connected to the earth. And if you pick it up, you can remove it and it stays the same. But if you take a plant and you snip it or you pull it out, if it's not connected to the earth or in soil or in water, it's going to die because it has a life force around it. It has a connection to being alive. So I just want you to contemplate that for a moment. So I don't know if you've really contemplated the life force of a plant. What is it that keeps a plant upright, fresh? And then when you cut it, I know you can put it in water and it lasts a few days, but after a while it will die quicker than if it's in the soil, because it's not connected to the life force of the earth. So there's an interplay of the life force of the earth and the plant world. I just want you to contemplate that for a moment. The life force of the plant. And if you look at a rock back in the physical realm, it does have a slight energy field around it from the mineral realm, but it's not a life force energy per se. It's a frequency, it's an energy, but it's a little bit lower than that of the plant. And what you can do with a plant is when you train yourself with the spiritual work, you can actually see the life force around the outside of a plant as you can with a human or an animal. It's got the life force around it. And it's likened to, oftentimes, I don't know if you've ever done this when you're driving along a highway and it's a really hot day and you get that beautiful sheen coming off the road, like a light coming off the road. So when people see the energy field, it's a likened to that. It's like a light mist energy around. And of course, it changes colors and moves, and depending on what the plant is and what the time of day it is and how people see things. So it's very different. But I'll tell you a little story about the life field, because people say, how can you know or measure the life field? And I'll tell you a little story about a Steiner school, back to Steiner. I was teaching in a Steiner school with some children doing some nature study. And there were about 14 or 15 children in the garden with me, 10, 11-year-olds. And they all have a sketch pad and they had all their colors. They all the Steiner colored crayons. And I said, what I want you all to do is go and sit in the garden very quietly. And for about 3 or 4 minutes, just be really still and quiet and just look at one leaf on the plants. And I don't want you to just draw the physical plant. I want you to draw beyond the plant of something you may see around it. And that's what I left it at that. I didn't say much else. I said, just look beyond the plant and draw what you see around it. Now, every single child came back after 10 or 15 minutes to the exercise. They put their papers along the ground and we looked at each and every single one. And in the middle, there was a green leaf. Some had some yellows in it and browns and different colors, depending on the leaf they're looking at. But every single child had drawn an energy field around the leaf, every single child, because they saw it, they experienced it. Slightly different coloring, but it was very, very similar. The same energy flow, similar colors. There was sort of the rose energy color around it with some tinges of yellow and different colors in there. And that was a beautiful experience for myself and also the children to realize there's something beyond the physical. So we can see that. We can train ourselves to see that more and more and more. So that when you walk into a botanical garden, into a park, into the forest, rather than just seeing a 3D tree or a rose or a daffodil or whatever you're looking at, if you just soften your gaze and you train yourself, you can see this amazing other world, the life force of plants. And it's quite amazing. So that's the etheric realm. And we as humans have an etheric body. We have a life force as well. It's what does our healing. If we cut ourselves, it's the life force, the etheric body, the etheric energy that does the healing. It has a miraculous, magical power to do the healing, internally and externally. And oftentimes it's in the evening that all that healing quality gets done. If you cut yourself, oftentimes you can wake up in the morning and through the night, that cut has been healed, has been covered with new skin. And I'll explain a little bit more why it happens more in the nighttime or sleep time than it does when we're awake. Because when we're awake, another force is present, actually a couple of forces. I'll talk about those. But when we're asleep, during the day or during the night, the etheric body is more present and it's then able to do the healing. Now, to put those two together, the physical and the etheric, I just want to share something about that if we do not look after the physical body, and we have poison in the body, if we have another junk food in there, too much sugar, and it's attacking the body system. If there's pesticides, herbicides, and toxins in the body, the natural defense mechanism in the body, which is like the etheric realm, it has to work really, 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 really hard looking after the physical body in terms of throwing out and cleaning up all the toxins, so it has less force and energy to clean up any cuts. That's why some people take longer to heal with cuts and grazes and sores and bumps and bruises than other people, because their bodies are less healthy. So it takes a longer time to heal. So just think about that for a moment. So fast healers generally, their body's generally in better condition because it heals faster. Hasn't got so much to go and work on to keep the healing process going. It's just, okay, there's one thing I need to focus on rather than 20, warmth in, clean up, done. And that's quite an amazing concept to consider for a moment. So the etheric body can learn to see it. You can learn to see that life force. And usually it's around the body when you train yourselves to see it, depending on the energy field of the person. It's usually a couple of inches thick on the body, and it can sort of go out, this sort of space around the body, around the head. The head's a really good space to see it. You can get a sense of around here. If you really, really focus, you can start to see the haze, particularly around the head. You see it around the shoulders and the arms as well. And if you really want to feel that energy field, and you really want to highlight it so people can see it, a great way to do that is to warm the hands. If you want to do that now, you can warm your hands, and it'll get actually quite warm and hot. Rub, rub, rub. You're probably not going to burst into combustion into fire. They might if you go too fast, in fact. And then stop and feel the buzz in your hands. And then if you look at your hands, that's when you might see that beautiful flow of energy around your fingertips and around your hands. Most people can see it. It's like, whoa, that's freaky. I can see some sort of bubbly stuff around my fingers. Well, that's because you've created the energy flow, you've upped your energy, and the etheric body comes more alive. Really, really important to have an etheric body. Without it, we're simply dead. So you need your life force, you need your etheric body. So we've gone from the mineral realm to the plant realm. So the mineral, the rock, the physical, and then we have the plant and the etheric. Now, the third part of the fourfold human being is what we call the astral realm. Astral being like the starry realm. And to explain that a little bit more takes a little bit more in-depth explanation and a little bit more listening and understanding. But you can always go and study a little bit more of this by getting some books or contacting me, and we can go a little bit further. I do lots of workshops and lots of different things around this space for people who want to know more. But it's all a big part of the spiritual teachings I do, the anthroposophical teachings I do. And the astral body is very much connected to the animal realm. So all animals, particularly the mammals, they have what we call the astral realm. And in some animals, it's really easy to spot, and in others, not so much. But one way you know that it's in the animal realm is because animals love habits. Animals have to follow their instincts. And animal instinct is directly from the astral realm. An animal has no choice. It doesn't have conscious choice like human beings. And I'll get there in the fourth part of the fourfold human being. But the third part, the astral. So I want to tell a little bit of a story so you can really understand this. So imagine a dairy farm, and it's got all those cows in the paddock. And from a young age, they've learned that there's a milking process, usually about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, and usually about 4 or 5 p.m. at night, twice a day. The cows are milked. We won't go into the whole efficacy around that and all the farming aspects around it, but let's just take that. The cows are milked twice a day. Let's say 5 a.m., 5 p.m., or 4 a.m., 4 p.m., twice a day, every day, 7 days a week, for many, many, many years for some of the cows. So they start that, they learn it, and then it gets locked in to their habit body, into the astral realm. So the cows go off to be milked. They just know the farmer can call them, but they're sort of already on their way because it's become a habit, become a set habit. And this is what the astral body does, the soul body, astral body, and I'll get into what we call it, the soul body and the astral body as well, because the astral is like the umbrella, and underneath the umbrella, we have the feelings, the emotions, the soul qualities. And in that astral realm, the animal realm, is where we have those habits. So if we have a habit as human beings, whether it's a good habit or a not so good habit, it could be too much alcohol, too many cigarettes, too much sex, too much porn, whatever that is that's out of control, that's because of a strong astral energy. And it pulls us into the habit realm that then becomes an addiction. So we have to work on that addiction realm, that habit realm in the astral space. And when we do it, I'm a psychotherapist. I work a lot. I've been 20 years now working with psychotherapy, and trying to work with people in that habit space, in that addiction space, cognitively, is really quite challenging. It does have some impact, some effect, and there are some, some really good cognitive therapists out there that do that well. But it's almost like you go to the wrong bus stop. You go to the bus stop to catch a train rather than going to the train stop to catch a train. You've got to go to the right place to get the right transport. And if we're going to go into the soul work, into the astral realm to deal with whatever, then of course we have to go into astral realm. We have to go to that soul realm to deal with it, because that's where it sits, that's where it lies. And this has always been a bit of a conjecture, a bit of a challenge in the psychotherapeutic space around understanding and knowing where things belong and where things come from, and then essentially how to work with them. So in my work as a psychotherapist and counselor, I work from the physical, and then the emotional, of course, which is in that realm. And then sometimes we get into the cognitive space where we need to make some decisions from that cognitive understanding. So it's about being holistic in the journey in the psychotherapeutic realm. So back to the cows in the paddock. They go off, they get milked twice a day. Now, imagine, if you can for a moment, that one of the cows suddenly says, I'm not going today. I've decided I'm going to sit down in the paddock and I'm just not going to go into the cow shed to be milked. Well, it can't. It cannot fight that force. It cannot fight it. As a human being, we can make a conscious choice. I can choose not to drink or eat, and I can, literally starve myself to death. If you put food and water in front of an animal, it cannot consciously refuse it. It cannot say no, because its habit, its need, its drive, its desire is to eat and drink. So I just want you to get that into your mind for a moment. Animals cannot say no to the basics of survival: eating, drinking, sleeping. They can't deprive themselves of sleep. They can't deprive themselves of food. They can't deprive themselves of water, because their desire, their force in that astral realm is what drives them. It's what guides them. It's what guides them. Now, here's a thing that is, you've got to find your own reality in this, your own belief system. This is around, the feeling realm, the sentient realm, the feeling realm of living sentient creatures, animals, birds, insects, sub-insects, even little tiny creatures we can't probably even see, those that live on the body, millions of them. Do they have feelings? Do they have feelings? Or is it that we put our human feelings onto animals? And it's a really great one to contemplate and think about. Because if you think of the dolphin, everybody loves dolphins, everybody loves whales. And there's this whole thing about save the dolphin, save the whale, because they're beautiful, but they also have feelings. They also have feelings. But how much of our humanness do we put into that? It's a question. And I'm not going to share my thoughts on that. I just want you to think deeply about that. So think about that. Think about the dolphin and the whale, because they're at the forefront of most people's thoughts when you think of an animal that has feelings. Most people go, oh yeah, a dolphin or a whale, or a dog or a cat. But now let's think of a cockroach. Let's think of a cockroach. Does a cockroach have feelings? Because if a whale does, perhaps a cockroach does. Perhaps a fly, a wasp, a bee, a bird. So I just want you to contemplate that for a moment. That feeling realm that lives under the umbrella of the astral realm. And this is where I want to talk about the soul aspects, because the soul world from my study, from my belief system, from the study I've done around anthroposophy and spirituality and the human being, is I have quite a clear understanding for me of what the soul realm is. Because we have the soul realm, then we have the spiritual realm. And when I get into philosophical conversations with people, oftentimes they're very confused. And oftentimes I say to people, can you give me a quick synopsis of what you mean by soul and what you mean by spirit? And it's very rare to get people who can actually really define the two and get really clear for me. So my little challenge to you, if you're on your personal spiritual journey, is to define it for yourself, get really clear. Go and do some study. Go and do some deep meditations. Go and get clarity. Get some clarity around what do you mean by soul? What do you mean by spirit? What does it mean for you? What does consciousness mean to you? I think it's really important to, if you're on the spiritual journey and you really want to understand, you have to define it for yourself through your research, your study, your meditative life, and from your experience of life. And I've been doing that for 30 years in my spiritual journey of anthroposophy. I've really come to define what's meaningful for me, what's real for me, what's the truth for me, what's a belief for me. And it takes a lot to really get that clarity. So the soul world. For me, the soul world is that place where we have our desires, we have our feelings, we have our emotions. And for me, it comes in three aspects. We have that sentient soul, that feeling soul. And a lot of people talk about, heart feelings, heart intelligence, feeling from the heart having its own intuitive and if you're almost like a thinking process from the heart. People, call it heart intelligence. Well, for me, that's that sentient aspect of our being. And for me, a lot of the animal realm have that. Animals do sense, they sense fear. They sense calm in a human being. They sense friendliness, if you like. They sense when perhaps a human's going to beat them. So there's a sentient, intuitive aspect to some animals. Elephants in particular got a very, very strong sentient aspect to their soul being, to their intuitiveness, to their emotions, particularly around the family of elephants. Very protective in that space. So for human beings, we have this sentient soul that's very much connected to the feeling realm. So we feel it. We get into our two aspects of the sentient soul, which is whether we're drawn towards something or whether we're pushed away from something. So we're drawn into something and we feel somebody's love, or we're pushed away from it, we're repelled from it, we feel a bit of non-love, a bit of hatred towards it, a bit of rejection about it. And that's a whole nother topic that I can share. I just want to touch on that a little bit. It's what the soul does. It either warms or it cools towards a situation or a person. And that usually comes intuitively. So that's one aspect of the soul, is what I call the sentient soul, the feeling aspect. The other part of the soul I want to talk about is what we call the intellectual soul. The soul that knows, the intelligent soul. And that's connected to the thinking, if you like, a little bit more connected to the head sphere. And there's a connection into that. Once again, there's a bit of study in that. But the intellectual soul is that wise soul, the one that knows. You can say, I know. And it's not because you've read something or you've seen something, but you know in your soul that something is real for you. It's a truth from the intellect. I know that. I can know that. I know that. And that's a really great feeling. To know that you know. I know. How do you know? I just know. How do you know? Well, it's in my intellectual soul. I just know. Yeah, I know. And that's a great place to be when you know. I know that's true for me. How do you know? Because it's in my intellectual soul, not because it's in the back of my brain. And then the third part, so we've got the feeling realm, and we've got the thinking realm. And the third part, because we work in that trilogy, is the will aspect. So we have thinking, we have feeling, and then we have the will. And the will is very much about the doing, the acting. So the third part of the soul is what we call the moral soul. The moral soul. Because morality really comes from actions. Morality comes from actions. Maybe not physical action, but it comes from the action of doing, of acting. I act morally. I act morally. I act morally towards somebody, or towards the planet, towards the universe, to myself. So I just want you to contemplate that for a moment. The morality of the soul. How you treated somebody today, this week, this month. Was it moral? Was it right? Was it the right thing to do? Was there some deceit there? Was there a lie there? Was there some cover up because you were scared of something? You didn't quite say it as it should have been. That morality. And we feel that, don't we? We feel whether we've been moral, whether we've done the right thing towards somebody or something. You know, if a dog walks past you and you stroke the dog and you're nice to the dog, you know, it's a beautiful feeling. It's a moral, good feeling. But if you kick the dog, how do you feel afterwards, truly? It wasn't a very moral act. So for me, the soul, three aspects. The intellectual soul, yeah, which is the thinking. The sentient soul, which is the feeling. Yeah. And then the moral soul, which is the will. So we've got thinking, feeling, and willing, which is the threefold that we come across a lot in anthroposophy. We work with it so much in everything we do. We don't just work from one sphere. We try to engage all three spheres of the thinking, the feeling, and the willing. Thinking, feeling, and willing. I just want you to lock that into your consciousness for a moment. And then I want to talk about something called desires. We all have desires. Some of them are very positive desires, and some of them maybe are not quite desirable desires, but we still have them. And that's what drives us into that addiction realm. Because if the desire comes too strong for something, even if it's not good for us, the desire will win every single time if we allow it to. And there's only one thing that can arrest that and stop that. And I'm going to get to that when we do the fourth aspect of the human being. But just now, let's stay with the astral realm. Let's stay with the desire. Because if I desire something, if I desire a great big block of dark organic chocolate, and I really want it, even if I know it's probably not going to be good for me, I'm going to go and get that chocolate. I'm going to desire it so much that I'm going to force myself to get it. To the point maybe where, and this is where that morality code comes in, if I'm not morally connected to myself, I might go into a supermarket with no cash and go, I have a desire so much for that chocolate bar that I'm going to steal it. I'm going to put it in my pocket and walk out with it, because my need, my desire, my addiction for it, you know, it might not be a physical addiction. It could be a need addiction, a soul addiction. It could be a sugar fix as well, addiction. But it's so much that we're driven to go and get something. So the moral code around the soul and the desire, if we started to look at that seriously in terms of crime, and we work with criminals in terms of that moral aspect of their soul, that desire of why they go out to do something. Because once something gets set as a habit, a bit like the cow being milked, and people get used to doing something and it's not stopped, if authority doesn't stop it, or one's own inner authority doesn't stop it, it continues and often builds and builds and builds until the point where it's out of control, totally out of control. And if we look at our own lives, I know I have a little bit of a rucksack full of that stuff. Even after 30 years of deep spiritual and personal development work, I still know I have things that are not 100% in control. And that, it's still there. And I haven't got full control of them. So I work on them often. But this is the nature of the soul. The astral body is absolutely powerfully strong. Absolutely powerfully strong. And I want to put this into a human growth perspective. Yeah, in terms of the growth of the human being from birth right through to just over the age of 20, probably 21, 22, 23, 24, perhaps a little bit older. Because when we're born, we're physical. Yeah, like we're all physical. We pick up a baby, we can feel it, we can feel the skin. It's got bones, it's got the skull, it's got the fingernails, it's got hair, so we know it's physical. It's also got a very powerful life energy about it. Babies just exude energy, because what they've done, they've taken on their mother's etheric energy. And one of the biggest times for particularly a woman to have etheric strong energy is around the protection of that baby. We call it, the mantle around the child. And the baby lives energetically within the mantle or the cloak, the etheric cloak of the mother, in a really healthy relationship. And a lot of the artwork, a lot of the old original artwork, particularly the mystic artwork, of those beautiful blue, particularly blue capes that the Virgin Mary and other women wore around the child, because it envelopes and holds the child in the etheric space. And that lasts for quite a number of years, and then 7 or 8 years, and then this child slowly starts to break away and form its own etheric energy. And then the mother can relax and go, "Oh, thank you, I'm going to get some of mine back because I'm exhausted," because that's what happens. The mothers can be exhausted particularly if they don't look after themselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Exhaustion of the life force can be drained, and the children suck it up. Particularly if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 children, you've got to be very cautious of holding your own energy. So then what happens when the child's about 7 or 8 years old? It starts to break away from the mother's mantle a little bit, becomes a bit more independent. And the astral body starts to form a little bit. And certainly by the time a child is 13, 14, 15, those desires start to kick in. That's when we get the sexual organs start to, come alive. Oftentimes the periods start for young girls, because that energy is starting to flow in the astral realm, the starry realm. It's when the desires start to kick in with children. It's when the moral code starts dropping with children, when they go, "Ooh, I can tell a lie. I can say to mum, I didn't eat the strawberries." Whereas usually up until that age, the children go, "Yeah, I ate the strawberries." Because they haven't learned that they can do that deceit in that space. And that's part of that astral soul moral aspect starts to grow in children. And of course, all through our life, but it starts to develop around 13, 14, 15 in children. You can see it in children, the astral body, the acne starts, the body's happening, the body hair starts. That's because the astral body's coming alive with all the inner forces. It comes alive very strongly. And you can see that development. It's a beautiful development, but it has to be looked after. It has to be nurtured. It has to be tamed. Otherwise, you get wild teenagers out there. Like I'm on the Gold Coast here, and in the news, like all the time now, is these young kids, they're stealing cars. They got into the habit of it. They get a buzz, they get a kick out of it, and because it's not being stopped, they're just getting the desire for it more and more and more. So of course, bigger cars, faster cars, more regular, because they get a buzz out of it, they get a thrill out of it, and it's they're not getting caught, they're not getting stopped. Oftentimes they get caught and then they get let off, and they do it again and again and again, and that's because it's in the astral soul realm. And of course, the people in the institutions that run and look after the kids, they don't understand this, because they're not often, a few are, but generally not. They're working in the cognitive space, trying to work with the kids, and you can't do that. But you've got to get into the soul aspect of this. You've got to get into the soul work to really work with young people in this realm. So that's the astral realm, the desire realm, and desire of love, the desire of hatred. It's a very, very powerful space. And I really want you to sit with that for a moment, get an understanding of that for a moment, and be really with it, really get a sense of, where am I right now in my understanding of my soul, of my astrality, And once again, you know, from an energetic seeing perspective, when people start to see the buzz of the etheric realm, one can also see the outer layer of that astral realm. You know, we have expressions for things like, you know, red for anger, you know, black for bad, depressing moods, you know, yellow for happiness, you know, sanguine yellow. We have red for, you know, good, full-on choleric energy. We have blue for melancholy. We have different colors for different moods. And when you start to train yourself to see those astral movements, and they're usually pretty lively, a bit like fireworks, rather than, you know, the tame etheric body, you can start to see people and read people and understand people from their energy fields. And it's an amazing experience. Amazing. When I choose to turn it on, obviously when I meet people straight up, I don't turn that and I go, oh, I'm going to analyze people. I only do it if invited in, or if I really need to do it. You know, if I'm in a dangerous situation, often sometimes I go, okay, beep, 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 put it on. Okay, that person, that situation. Let's just walk clear of that, because energetically, it's not safe. You know, they're in that in that space, and you can see it, you can feel it. You know, clear vision, clairsentient. You know, there's many ways to see beyond the 3D, and it's achievable, and it doesn't take a lot. Just it's a bit like driving a car. You only learn to drive a car when you go and get a teacher to teach you to drive the car. You know, the foot goes there, the hand goes there, steering wheel's here, mirrors are here, stay on the left-hand side of the road, and you learn all the skills to drive a car. Well, going into the spiritual realm, you need skills too, and it's good to get a teacher to take you there. I've been very blessed in my life to have had some amazing teachers, particularly my teacher, Rudolf Steiner, that's been my non-physical teacher for 30 years. So I read his books, I study, I meditate, I tune in, and yeah, he's pretty amazing. But I've also had more than a couple of handfuls of other amazing teachers, and I still work in that realm, still as a spiritual student, and I find it a fascinating space. So I would urge you to do that. Now, the physical, the etheric, and the astral, you can see how we're building it up. We're building it up from the mineral realm to the plant realm to the animal realm, and then finally we come to the human realm that is distinctly human. And the reason we're distinctly human is because we have what we call I consciousness. We have I presence. I can understand myself. I can see myself. I can observe myself. I can be aware of myself. And that's unique to the human being. No animal can be aware of itself. Now, what is the I presence? That's an interesting question, and one I really want you to contemplate and work on and go away and study. But I'll give you a bit of an overview to just whet the appetite. So for me, there's two aspects of the I consciousness. There's that I consciousness that can overcome astrality to be the choice maker. So if I'm sitting in front of a big plate of mushrooms on toast, which is one of my favorite meals, I love, mushrooms in garlic, I'm going to eat it because I see it and I'm hungry. And my hunger will go, you have to eat that because you're hungry, and you need to satisfy the need to eat because your body needs it. The desire is there. The need is there to eat. Now, if I was a dog and a bowl of food was put into me, I'd have to eat it because my instinct would tell. As a human being, I can find that consciousness, I can find that will to say, I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to fast. I'm going to go hungry. I'm going to fight the urge, my natural instinct to eat, my desire, my astral need to eat it. With my I presence, I can say no. And that's a very powerful thing to have choice, because it's unique to human beings. Unique. I can say yes or no. I can say maybe as well. I don't really believe in maybes. I think yes and no is a lot stronger. But the power to say yes, the power to say no, the power to go left or right without being driven by an instinct to go left or right. You know, the crowd goes left, you know, and if there's a herd of elephants and they go left, every single elephant is going to go left. It's going to follow the matriarch. But with humans, I can go, I'm not following the crowd, I'm going right. I can be an individual. Whereas a pack of animals, unless it's driven out, like a lion can be driven out of the pack, but its urge is to be part of that pack, but it can't, because you know, the instinct is, if I go in, I'm going to be killed. So instinct keeps it away. Whereas humans, we can choose not to be part of a pack, a group, a family. We can walk away. Animals can't. And that's a very uniqueness. So that's one aspect of what I call the smaller I, the engaged I, the one that can control and overcome addiction. It can overcome habits. It can change habits. And when I'm doing addiction work with my clients, this is very much where I go. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. I do a lot of work with cigarettes and marijuana. It's really, really, really a common one I work with. And what I do, I engage the I principle. So I'll get my client to get a cigarette. We'll stand it up. Sometimes we stand it on a drawing pin on the floor on a piece of paper, and we have it there, and we look at the energy around the addiction. You know, what's the hole? What's the space in the body where it gets a satisfaction from the cigarette? Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. What's it give you? What's the desire for that smoke, that taste, that feel? And then we look at the organization that, you know, brings that cigarette in. What's the energy behind that? The power of that. And as a smoker, as the one that's got the addiction, compared with the cigarette, and I'm not present, my astral body is giving way to the addiction. You know, it's loving the addiction. Then the power of the cigarette is huge. The whole room is filled with like a cigarette. And then the little me cannot challenge that, because my consciousness isn't there, my will drive isn't there, my incarnated I presence isn't there to battle it. It's just not there. So the cigarette addiction just continues, or the alcohol or the porn or whatever it is that we're on, because it's become a habit, a negative habit. But when we bring in the I presence, and there's a whole process I bring into that of, you know, naming it, being it, standing in it, in your solid presence. And then we look at that little cigarette on the floor. Certainly the cigarette is tiny, and we've overcome it. And a great image for that, like a mystical image that's been around for a very, very long time, is St. George and the Dragon, where the presence of the St. George, you know, on the horse usually, and he's usually got the spear or the sword over the dragon. Now, in modern day, oftentimes they talk about killing the dragon, but in the mythical space, he overcame the dragon. He held the dragon at bay. He held the dragon at bay. So that spirit, you know, the I presence, which is the spirit of us, is controlling and overpowering the astral force, which is often depicted in the demonic dragon or the snake sometimes in the Christian faith, you know, the snake, the serpent. And how do we overcome that? We overcome that with our spirit, with our I presence. Very powerful. So a lot of my work in presence work, personal development work, spiritual work is about getting that I presence so incarnated in our being that when we have those astral moments, the morality, the intellectual soul, or the feeling soul, we can overcome it. We can control it. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot of work, because that astral habit may have been there for 30 or 40 years, and it's very strong in habit. So we have to find ways to outsmart it, to work with it. And of course, you know, we have ways to do that. We have specific sequences in our psychotherapeutic process that I've learned. I did 5 years of psychotherapy and still continue to study and practice, of finding specific sequences and processes to unfold that, to make the I presence strong. Now, the second part of the I presence for me comes in two parts, and this is where different people have different ideas. But from my own experience and my study and my insights, It's like I have my internal eye that deals with all that. And then I have what I call my big eye, the universal eye. And that's the one that is almost like it's watching me. It's observing me. I call it the observer, the eye observer. And when I tune into that, I can be aware of that. I do a lot of public speaking. And when I'm doing my public speaking, I'm always aware of this one, watching and listening of how I am and what's coming out of my mouth. Even here on the webinar, I'm very aware that this bigger aspect of Adrian, this bigger eye, this universal eye, is present for me to engage with me, to allow me to speak and to be clear from that bigger, higher spiritual perspective. And having that awareness is quite amazing. And it takes, quite a while, quite a number of years, in fact, to get into tune with that. It's all part of the spiritual development. And it doesn't come overnight. It takes, 30 years on this journey for myself. So a lot of work, a lot of study, a lot of awareness, a lot of self-chatter, a lot of doubt, a lot of fear. We have to overcome them. And we can do that with our eye presence, absolute eye presence. So that's pretty much the fourfold human being. So we have the mineral realm, which is the physical. We have the plant realm, which is etheric. We have the animal realm, which is the astral. And we have the eye presence, which is the spirit realm. So we have spiritual presence. We can use that for our meditation. We can use that for our prayer. We can use that in the way we meet another human being. We can meet them with sympathy, which is a soul gesture, or we repel and we have antipathy. And I'm going to share a little bit about the sympathy and antipathy in another webinar at another time, because it's a whole nother subject. But this all happens in that soul realm. But when we have our eye presence, we can learn to meet the human being fully by seeing them as a soul being, as a spirit being. We can meet eye to eye. We can meet eye to eye. In some cultures, they do that. I see you. I see you. And it's a beautiful statement. Because not, I'm not going to see your foibles and your mistakes and your negative qualities. It's like, I see you. I see the spiritual aspect of you. I see the morality in you. I see the intellectual soul in you. I feel that in you. It is sentient. I see you. It's a beautiful, beautiful statement. I spend a fair bit of time in Africa. And when I meet, my African Zulu friends, it's like we meet in that space. And they say, I see you. And it's just really beautiful. So let's learn to see each other. Let's learn to see each other truly as human soul, spirit beings. And everybody you meet, recognize that they are physical. They have an etheric body. They have a healing quality about them. They have those desires. They have their challenges around addiction and habits. We all do, every single one of us. And then we have that spiritual eye aspect. So somebody said to me, how do you gauge your spirituality? How do you gauge your spiritual journey? And it's a really great question, because I can say I can write an essay on it, I can give a subness, and I can do a 1-hour webinar on it, whatever. But does that really give a measure of my spirituality? Maybe gives you a measure of my intellect or my study, understanding, or what I've read or what I've heard or the lecture I've been to, and I can regurgitate that. But I'm not really interested in regurgitating information to help people on the spiritual journey, because it doesn't really help. People have to find it themselves. But a really good measure of one's spirituality is how I meet the next person on my journey. And what I mean by that is, how do I treat them? How do I treat them? Do I really truly see them? Do I feel them? Do I understand them? Can I see their pain? Can I understand them on their journey? For me, that's a true measure of spirituality. So I want to thank you for listening in, watching in. I hope you get something from this. If you'd like to do more, if you're looking for that next level of personal spiritual development and you're looking for somebody to guide you, to work with you, please do contact me, because it's what I do. I've been doing for a very long time with a lot of people. I love the work, and I can work one-on-one. I can work with couples. I can work in small groups. I can give a talk, a lecture, a workshop, or we can do a longer journey. I've got some clients I've been working with now for a very long time, 5, even some 10 or 12 years. And they just come back for a top up. What's next? And we do the next part of the journey, send them on their merry way, and they come back with questions and thoughts and insights and learnings. And I can see it in their being. And just to give you an idea of what that is how do we measure ourselves? A spiritual journey is a schooling. It's a schooling. And like any schooling, it's got a structure. So we start off in what I call the kindergarten. We start with the basic building blocks. We start to get to understand the language of our choice of spiritual path. For me, Anthroposophy, learning all the different things about etheric and astral and all the other things that come with it, thinking and feeling and willing, just all the basics. And I'll read some text and I'll go to a lecture and I'll listen to people and I'll get a sense of it. And that's my kindy. I'm learning to write, I'm learning to read, I'm learning to listen. And then I go to primary school and I learn a little bit more. I learn a bit more about English and maths and a few other subjects, and I put it all together and I start to get a bit of a rounded education of all the basic building blocks. And I could leave primary school and not go to high school and I'd get through in the world. But if I want to really get into my subjects and really understand them and go to the next level, I go to high school and I deepen my understanding of English and maths and science and chemistry and all those things. And I start to expand in that field. And then I go, I can leave school. I'm going to get a job and that's fine and go and study on the side. But if I really want to take my education to that next level, I go to varsity, I go to college, I go to university. And I specialize in something. For me, I've specialized in spirituality for 30 years. That's my specialized subject, human development, human personal spiritual development. And study, study, study. And then from there you go, where do I go? Go and do my PhD. I really specialize to go and write something really special. And for me, I've written my book, Where Am I Right Now? On spirituality. I go and lecture, I go and talk, I give workshops. After all the information I've gathered and the insights and the experiences. So I show it in that way. So it's a journey. So the question is, where are you right now in the journey? Where do you want to go to? And my advice, my recommendation is find a spiritual path that you stay on. It's like schooling, stay on the schooling path. Don't keep hopping from one to the other, because if you hop from one to another, it's like doing 1 year of French, 1 year of German, 1 year of Spanish, one year of Hebrew, whatever it is. You'll have the basics, and you'll always have the basics, which is nice if you travel to those countries. But if you want to get into a deep conversation, you're going to have to study for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And if you want to be absolutely fluent, it's probably 5 or 10 or 20 years. And the spiritual journey is just like that. So I'm going to encourage you, go and find a spiritual teacher, spiritual path, if that's what you'd like, and go and dive into it and follow it. So thank you once again for being here, listening in, watching in, and I hope to touch base with you again real soon. See ya.